this is part of the European Caravan sessions that we're running. And a bit of a background to that is we are partnering up with Spain, Portugal, France, and Scotland to look at how participatory budgeting works across Europe, specifically in relation to green cities and green PB. Today, we have got a speaker talking about what green participatory budgeting looks like across the world. So yeah, it's part of the training suite. Portugal event started in October. We are hosting this month. Barcelona is also hosting this month, and then it goes to Santa Greve, and it all finishes in Grenoble at the OIPD conference, where they'll be learning about this right across the world, and there will be recommendations made for future participatory budgeting. And I hope I've got that all right, but if I haven't, I'm sure that will Eves will pick it up a wee bit later. A little bit about myself. My name's Francesca Lynch. I am a development manager at SCDC, and SCDC are the leads for community development in Scotland. We obviously work for active, inclusive and just Scotland, where our communities are strong, equitable and sustainable. We work directly with frontline organisations as well as development practitioners and policymakers. We support PB Scotland and the Green PB Action Group. A little bit more about me in that I was a recent addition to the SCDC team. So since January, I've been leading on Green PB and looking at the exploratory phase round about what it is and where we can take it. Not knowing who the participants were today, I thought it would be quite good to give a brief introduction to what participatory budgeting is. And for the rest of the presentation, you'll probably hear me referring to it as PB, because it is really a difficult thing to say, especially when you try to present and especially when you speak as fast as I do. So what is participatory budgeting? Really, it is just a way for people to decide on how public money should be spent. It is as simple as that. It's about getting people involved in decisions that will affect them in their communities and letting them have a say on where money is directed. It has various different models right across the world. It started in Brazil and has been replicated in pretty much the whole of the world. But in a Scottish context, we look at it in kind of two main themes. So we'll look at what we call small grants or community PB, and also mainstream and participatory budgeting. Now, the small grants PB is usually ring-fenced pots of money that's disseminated within communities, and that's where it's voted on, and that's where the process is decided. And the mainstreaming is where we're looking at bigger public budgets. Most recently, the big 1% commitment to mainstreaming from all our local authorities, but I'll speak a wee bit about that just in a few minutes. So PB is where people decide on where money is spent. I think as a bit of a context, PB has been happening in Scotland now for about almost 8 years, so just pre-2014. And in the kind of 8 years, there's been loads happening, including the development of a charter for PB. And this is what you can see here. This charter was co-produced by Frontlines PB practitioners, people in the PB field, experts from outside Scotland, and also involved people that went on to become part of the national PB steering group and also PB action groups. Now, what this sets out is just what you can expect from a PB process. This is the key principles round about any process, and that it should be fair and inclusive, it should be participatory, deliberative, it should empower people, it should be creative and flexible, transparent, and most importantly, it should become part of our democracy. So that's the principles that underpin participatory budgeting. What we've found through all our PB work today and also developing the charter is that there's numerous benefits associated with PB in general. So they're all there. I won't read them all out, but you can see they're all rounds about strong relationships, trust, respect, targeting resources to local communities and encouraging innovation from local communities as well, recognising that quite often people in power don't necessarily have all the answers, and you need to look to your communities to actually find what works for them. So there's obviously benefits for participatory budgeting. And kind of moving on to what and why green participatory budgeting. Green participatory budgeting is a kind of a new term. However, it's not necessarily a new thing, if that makes sense. So in all the participatory budgets we have seen in the last 8 years, there has always been an aspect of environmental or climate action in there. So we see this through things like the development of play parks, or the development of community gardens, bike swapping schemes. There's been loads and loads and loads of environmental activity, but we've never attributed them necessarily to green participatory budgeting. So obviously now, with the commitment from the Scottish Government to just transition and the shift towards climate justice and net zero, we're now looking at participatory budgeting as a way to further that action. Participatory budgeting is a participatory process. It's not the only one there, but it is one that gains really good traction with local people. It's tangible, it's easy to understand, and people can see it right through. So therefore, this year, we are looking at how can we use participatory budgeting to further the green agenda. Green PB is just a thematic form of PB. The PB process is always the same, regardless of what field you put it into, whether it be youth PB, whether it be green PB, whether it be health PB. It's always the same process, round about the deliberation with local communities, the voting on priorities, and then real projects submitted by people getting funded. Essentially, what we've found from the discussions this year is that on top of the benefits of PB, when you apply it to green PB or climate change, you can shift local people's attitudes towards climate change. You can give them a sense of joint responsibility, and you can reduce their carbon footprint. And it encourages them to be a wee bit more innovative about the green ideas. And we've seen this because some of the learning where we have spoken to people who have been involved in green activity, when you speak to them about climate change, they understand it a wee bit better. So it's taking it in that chunkable bites, whereas we're saying to communities, you were part of this process, you have done your free cafe and your local hub. Do you know that you have then increase and reduce your carbon footprint? And when they say no, that's when you can open up the discussions around about climate change. So that's another major benefit from green PB and using PB. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of what and why green PB and participatory budgeting. Just going to move on quickly to the national PB journey. So just to set this in a kind of national context, so that we can recognise for people that's not familiar with participatory budgeting, this is not a new thing. As I said, it's been here since 2014 minimum. And today the government have invested 6.5 million in participatory budgeting. Now, the figures are right until 2020. They've also, as part of the learning and part of the discussions, they implemented an agreement between the Scottish Government and COSLA, where that 1% of council budgets will be subject to PB. That has been slowed down because of COVID, but what we're hearing from COSLA at the minute is that's now starting to pick back up again. And most importantly, for the green PB aspect of this, participatory budget was recognised by the Just Transition Commission as a way forward, and we've actually got that there. It's recommendation 13, where they said that this could be put at the heart, and they talk about targeting some money towards it. That's actually came into fruition just recently with this year's programme for government, again, including green participatory budgeting. And this year, £1 million has just been committed from the Just Transition budget for this year to the North East for a PB process that I will speak a wee bit about later on. There is hopes also, I should say, about this. This is the first year of participatory budgeting being rolled into Just Transition, but if this pans out really well, we're hoping that it can be written in the next 10 years, because that's a 10-year fund with £500 million up to grab. Just a little bit about the structures to let you understand where participatory budgeting fits into government. Obviously, well, not obviously, you won't know this, but it's the community empowerment team within Scottish Government that head up their participatory budgeting. We have commitment from two really key members of staff who are very supportive of participatory budgeting and have been on that journey, one of them since its very beginnings. We also have a national PB strategic group that feeds into government, and they have recently released their framework for the next 5 years. And what you see here is the 5 themes that's coming through that framework. Most importantly for this session, under the cross-cutting priorities theme, you'll see there a Green PB action group, and this is where the green stuff kind of lies. So then the PB action strategic group looks across the whole of the landscape for participatory budgeting, but they also have specific targets, which I think is my next slide, which might be a wee bit better, yes. So this is the priorities, 16 priorities for the next 5 years for the National Strategic Group. And as you will see there, under number 7 is climate justice. Now, this is a kind of important step for us, mainly because this is what has allowed SCDC and government to come to an agreement to undertake the exploration of green participatory budgeting. So this is a big driver for basically my position within SCDC. Look at it and start to have the conversations and start the learning rounds about how can we use this better? How can we use green PB to achieve some of the targets associated with just transition? I'm going to move on to PB in practice now. And I'm hoping, is Eve's here? No? Oh, he's not here yet. This will be interesting. Oh, here he's.
Oh, here he is. He just came in the waiting room.
So that's okay. I'll give you a couple of minutes just to settle in. I'm just going to speak a wee bit about our flagship examples of green PB ongoing at the minute. As I said, it's a new process for us this year. It really has. We really have been looking at it as a learning journey for this year. It's just been really fortunate that the Green PB Caravan has came along at this time. It's been really timely for us, and also just want to nudge in the direction of 2 big exemplar projects. So these are the ones that we will be learning from this year in Scotland. The first being the Dundee Climate Fund. So Dundee has recently announced, just back in September there, a £750,000 fund disseminated in a PB process targeted towards their climate change strategy for Dundee. That will run over 4 years. There'll be 2 rounds of the funding, and it is all tied into basically achieving their climate change strategy, which relates to just transition and net zero. It's a really big project, and actually what's been nice about it is that there is lots of local authorities now getting into the conversation round about how can they look at their PB targets in relation to achieving some of their climate change priorities, and Dundee, I think, will be the one that everybody is watching. So I think on the back of this, hopefully, if everything goes well, you'll start to see more and more local authorities looking at how they can include climate within their PB activities. The second one on the screen there is the Just Transition Participatory Budgeting Fund. This is the one that I made reference to earlier. This is £1 million that's been targeted from the Just Transitions Fund to local communities in the northeast of Scotland, them being Moray, Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. This is a really interesting fund and one that we're watching very closely, because this is not a mainstream fund, this is a community fund. So this money has been put out for communities to access, for them to come up with ideas and projects that will help them reduce climate emissions. It's a huge amount of money. It's the biggest amount of money ever committed at the one time to participatory budgeting alone, let alone green participatory budgeting. So it really is one we're watching. And what's really good about this is that the government have entered into an agreement with third sector interfaces and local community voluntary organisations. So they're the ones that's leading on this project. They're the ones that's holding the funding, and they're the ones that's looking at the applications and doing the whole process behind it. So it really has been handed over to community ownership here. They presented yesterday, and for anybody that wasn't at the launch session yesterday, it really was a fantastic presentation in that their voting has literally, their deadline for applications has literally just closed. They have £333,000 for each community to spend. 2 of them have broke £1 million with the application that's come in. And one of them, which is the smallest one, which has under 100,000 people, has almost broke the £1 million. So that just gives you a flavour of the appetite that's there for this fund and how hard they've worked to get these application forms in. And I think at this minute, I'm going to stop sharing because that's the two big ones I wanted to speak about. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I'm going to pass to Yves, if Yves is here, who is going to take us through some examples of where this happens in Scotland and beyond.
All right. So
Oh,
can you see it?
let me see. We can, Yves, we can.
All right. So good afternoon to everybody. And I understand that today what we're trying to do is, what is it in terms of green PB and what role can it play in supporting climate action? What I want to share with you now is based on this comparative analysis and a couple of more cities actually which joined. And yesterday I was amazed, and today too, about what's happening in Scotland actually. So I think that some dots are missed here. But basically, what I want, we examined 4,400 projects, in all these cities, one by one. And one of the key lessons that we were interested in was to know what kind of projects are being funded, and selected. So the presentation here, it's the first time I'm doing it. And when I try to have a look at these green PB projects across the board, in different regions of the world, we detected 6 categories of projects. And I like to share with you these 6 categories to see how green PB is actually implemented, what kind of projects are being funded. All right. So I showed that yesterday, but it's a typical modality, the first modality, which is adaptation to the effects of climate change. And it's by far the highest number. This is in Portugal, wildfires, as you can see on top of the screen. And one of the projects which was out of the box so far in the whole Portugal, construction of a mega water tank of around 50,000 euros to enable local associations to better fight devastating fires. So what is interesting here is that through PB, there was a community-based decision on how to place the tank, you see. So it's a sort of spatial justice which is ingrained in that sort of project, but typical adaptation. Another one which I showed as well yesterday, I'm here in Indonesia, in Semarang, Indonesia, very exposed to high rise, to high rise of the sea on these 17,000 islands. And what has been approved through very tight participation of communities is the protection actually of the slums, which are directly flooded. So this sort of sandbags, which is for today adaptation, it's another sort of projects that are a little bit below the radar of what is usually being done in that sort of thing. Now, what was counterintuitive is that I want to move in the second category. On my right, adaptation to the effects of climate change, heavy rains, South Kivu, and you have bridges which are disrupted, and through PB, they rebuilt 7 of these bridges, typical adaptation. But on the other side, which was counterintuitive, is that some of the project, one of the project voted was the reforestation project. And interestingly enough, in a very poor community, the money was triggered for youth mobilization, volunteer work to reforest the mountains that were damaged. This is very unique. I thought at the beginning that the South was basically adaptation and North had more possibility to mitigate the effects. And as a matter of fact, it's not that clear. We should work a little bit more, but that's quite interesting in truly devastated regions. Now, a third mobility, we are still on what I call physical projects. It's here, I mean, an interesting initiative. It's Bordeaux, you know, on the Garonne River in France. And they have a thematic PB 100% on sustainable development. They put all the money on this. This was the first one, actually, that I knew of. And what they have done is a mix of adaptation and mitigation. Citywide fruit tree planting and open spaces projects are part of a Grey to Green ethos that aim to transform the city of stone, tarmac, and concrete into a more environmentally friendly place. What is interesting is that they started in places that were being flooded by the Garonne, you know, which is in contact with the Atlantic Ocean, but and the rise as well. So these constant flooding are needing adaptation. So you have a both approach there, which I found interesting. Mind you, we haven't gone enough into these definitions, you know, on what is adaptation and mitigation. A fourth modality is quite a unique PB, one of the first I know of, which is in Cerveira and Tominho. It's on both sides of the border between Portugal and the and Galicia, I mean the north, which is part of Spain, you know, and Oliver will appreciate this one as its country of origin and region of origin. So what is interesting here is that it's a very tiny project, or small one, I would say, where both the youth of both sides of the border are joining effort to try to find solutions and raising awareness. So you are not in building stuff. You are here one day by National Children's Works, you know, transforming recycled materials into art, but it's a raising awareness for the youth. It's much, much cheaper than what I showed you before. And the other one is a binational one-day climate impact discovery visit, which is crucial. Why? Because climate change effect are on both sides of a river. You know, they don't stop because you have simply a border there and you show your passport. Not at all. And quite crucially, this river has been, the trouble with it have been affecting, agriculture. This is an agricultural region. So having this youth PB on both sides, it's a way for them to build the future, not Portugal on one side, Spain on the other one, but getting the same awareness. So that's something which should exist, you know, in other countries, you know, to not have a national based, we need binational ones. But fourth modality, training, awareness raising projects, there are plenty of them. Yeah, but they are eligible. So that's a clear fourth modality. A fifth modality are early warning projects. Those of you who were here yesterday, you will remember what I was showing you about Russia with the early warning system, you know, for wildfires, which were affecting crops, but in a very significant way. And here I'm in Monterrey, metro region in San Pedro Garcia. And one of the requests and the ideas, which was transformed into an app, it's an alert system because of inversion of temperature. The city is extremely contaminated and sometimes so high that it's impossible. Here I'm in a school so high that children from here at secondary school, they cannot go out to make sports, you know, so they adapted the situation to have sports inside this building, which was built through PB. But more interestingly, now you have an app developed, which indicates to anybody, to the youth, but to the people as well, what is the contamination of the contamination and pollution of the air. So we are totally in a different sort of project. And it's part of this, I would say, a significant category out of the ones we examined, which is early warning. You know, for the people to be aware before the fight starts or before you have a flood or a tsunami, etc. That's another side of the adaptation, which has been largely under considered by, I mean, policies I know of. And here is one which is much, I mean, it's less common, I would say, even if they exist, which are studies and information systems. So you are not in building, planting trees or reforestation or building reservoirs, but it's, look at that case. Molina de Segura, it's in Murcia region. One of the projects in 2019 was studied, which is significant for a 70,000 inhabitant cities, yeah, which was 26,000 euros on collective electricity consumption. They said, we are not going to work on open spaces and using LEDs or using other solutions. No, we want as citizens to have an overview of what is spent on what, where, in order to be the first step finding solution based on renewable energies. So you see, what is interesting here is that people and communities in this is very strong community, assemblies and a federation of neighborhoods, and they are the one thinking ahead. They are not letting that for policy. So you see how a project can lead to policy changes. And it's not, I would say, this is a category that I saw now recently in Argentina with a university program where the students are supporting very small communities in very small municipalities in Argentina and leading to tremendous solutions based on studies and research and implementing them in public spaces. And I know that's the topic you're interested in. So I wanted to mention this sixth modality. And here is a bonus. What I see emerging is a large number of projects which have been accelerated and amplified because of COVID, related to food and access to food. And yesterday, when some of you were saying, I think it's Kathleen, was saying about community gardens and urban agriculture, this is typically something which has never been written upon. I want to start actually something on that, you know, to show that. And what is interesting here is that it's not only urban ag or community gardens and that sort of thing, even if they are a good share of these new projects, you know, related to rethinking food and understanding its consequence on the planet, you know, of transition. So you have that part, I would say production, let's say. Then you have support to agro industries. It's all along the food chain. And this is very interesting, and we should have that as a very clear sort of bonus in our understanding. And here I'm taking you in these huge 500 projects a year, Cuenca with $100, more than $100 per inhabitant per year. You can imagine what it would be in any of the cities you were mentioning, where you have organic farming, but at the same time, if you look at the picture, you have the whole transformation of products, you know, in more rural parishes, which are the vast majority in that city. So see, here, what I think amazing is how PB has left a little bit this sort of social side to move into economic dimension and job generation with new green jobs, you know, but based on organic farming, on women's group, etc. And that's something which should take the temperature about, you know. And you go to the States and you have highways which are transformed for direct fares between producers and consumers. So I go along my chain. Recycling of food. So that's probably one thing, considering Scotland, that will emerge probably, and that probably should be much more developed, because access to food everywhere I go now, it's a big issue. And if we do not rethink the food system, as people are doing, actually, we won't miss the train. So that's something I wanted to let you just have a sense of it. I will just go. I don't want to take too much of the time, the time is short. But look at the bottom. Why do they emerge and multiply? They are driven fundamentally, if you take all these 6 categories plus the theme of food, driven by the need to address very specific multiple effects of climate change, rather than by international agendas or programs. That's why they are so crucial to generate new ideas. This is a gold mine for our common future. And climate-sensitive PBs are the results of the dramatic effect that population suffer from. And I think that we should start from the suffering of people instead of the big agenda that we're working with. Here are what I said is mostly in the first one, in the first 2. And there's another one that you might be interested in, which goes much more into detail. That's my most recent one on that, which is greening cities through PB, with very concrete answers from Lisbon and from Molina de Segura, and it's in English. Then it's more accessible in the UK. All this, you have the contacts. I think that Francesca, you have them, and we can disseminate them. So it could be a way also to continue this dialogue. And thank you. I won't try to pronounce, the Gaelic, but I saw that apparently this is what you say. So I will limit myself with thank you, and very pleased to be part of the conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me. That's it.
Perfect, thanks, Eve. So that's been a bit of a whistle stop. Eve, if you can stop sharing your screen, if you can.
Sure. I do that.
So it's been a bit of a whistle stop tour around about PB, green PB, examples of PB. We will be getting into workshops shortly, but before that, if anybody has any questions, please just pop your hand up and we can, or any comments or anything you want to say at this point, please just let us know. Nope. Oh. Okay, Oliver and then Philip.
Well, hi everybody. I suppose I just wanted to pick up on David's comment in the chat, which is the classic question about PB. Is this just a process that fosters competition rather than collaboration? Is this about having a limited fund and then asking people to just fiercely compete with each other? And that's really, really far from the spirit of PB and indeed the history of PB. And I think Eve will be able to add to that as well. For 2 reasons. I'll give 2 reasons, but there are many more. One of them, just without necessarily going into the history of PB and its radical contribution across the world and all kinds of issues, especially on poverty, on social exclusion, on social justice issues, and increasingly on climate justice issues. But in terms of the format itself, the one thing to remember is that take, for example, the Northeast Just Transition Fund for the pilot just now. Now, that 1 million is part of a 20 million Just Transition Fund. The other 19 million, I'm not quite sure how they are going to be allocated. And this is what we need to remember, that the difference here is that in this case, at least this is not going to be down to a very complex bureaucratic application process that is unreachable for communities. In this case, communities will decide, right? So there is no, committee behind closed doors that decides on the allocation of that million. This is open. And in being open, it invites all kinds of community groups and organizations that otherwise wouldn't go for this kind of funds to mobilize and put forward proposals for action. And even those that don't get funded, they do make connections throughout the process, and they might try in the second round or in the next round by joining forces with others. Or indeed, and this is hopefully what's going to happen, or that's my hope for the 1 million, the 1 million will become 20 million, and the 20 million will become 100 million. So that them, because if we demonstrate that this can mobilize capacity and action and energy and support all the good community-led activity that is already out there and boost it, then to me, that's a collaborative force. But yes, it does come down to a vote. But in many ways, a vote in a transparent process, I think, is better than a committee behind closed doors that is not in the hands of communities themselves. So that would be my immediate answer. There's more that can be said, but just as an initial response. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, just following on from Oliver's comment there about the voting, I suppose, really. I don't have any direct experience of PB myself, so I'm just wondering how that voting happens and how it doesn't just turn into a sort of beauty contest, but there is a real opportunity for proper deliberation on the choices that need to be made.
Yeah. And specifically to, Philip, specifically to just transition in Aberdeen or voting in general and across PB?
In general, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's various things we can do to make the voting as fair and equal as possible. What we've seen in the past and what was a big factor in PB, and Oliver and Yves can back this up or maybe not agree with it, but we'll see. But in the past here, what's a lot of the time has been done is things like marketplaces, videos, so that when the community come in, they get to speak to all the projects that are wanting to or have an application form in, the reasoning behind it, all that kind of stuff. So they get a lot of information in person before they actually place their votes. That's a wee bit more difficult online, but what they've been trying to replicate online is kind of discussion areas or areas where you get more information on the projects, as well as backing that up. And this is what will happen in the Aberdeenshire case, back up with various days round about certain villages and stuff where people can get more access to further information. The voting itself can be done in a number of ways, and most commonly it is a spread vote. And what that means is that people will have a number of votes, so they don't just get one vote when they come along. It depends on the number of applications that's actually in. They get a representative number, and what that is trying to do is to stop the inequalities where you maybe have a really strong community group with X amount of members and a really small community group with hardly any members. When you put the spread voting in, it means that people, if they want to be eligible and actually take part in the process, need to vote for more than one project. So it kind of spreads the vote right across the process. There's other ways of doing it as well. There's things like weighted votings, where if you've got really small groups with really low amounts of members, like a vote for them will maybe equate to more points than for a bigger group with a bigger amount of members and potentially bigger income. So there's ways and means that you can do the voting. Just to round up, there's ways and means to make it equal and just, and that's what part of a good process should look like, and that's what we encourage through participatory budgeting. So I hope that answers your question. I've got a few hands going up. This is good. I'll start with Jordi. Oh, I've lost him. Where'd he go?
Yeah, you're on mute, Gordy.
On mute, yes, that's probably a good thing some days. Just to help with Philip's question there, I've two experiences of PB in the area that I live in, which is in the Scottish borders. One was I was delivering a climate challenge project, and part of that was we were given some money outside the project to deliver microfunding to the community, and we did it on basis of a participatory basis. So we had a vote, but it was an event day. So all the organizations that requested the funding, £500 maximum, we had a little bit of an event day that they set out their stalls and explained what their vision was, what they wanted to do, and the community was invited over. That's on an estate of about 3,500 people. So like-minded, so that worked out very well. And again, it built capacity within. You have an event, so you have a bit of collaboration between the groups, and people are talking to people, and all that strength builds out of it. Now, the other example was participatory budget based on the area partnerships of the local council, and they were given out to the 5 local area partnerships of what they have. And my experience was in one of those areas where they were based on a set of funds, a pot A and a pot B, and a pot A was the larger funds, and they used participatory budgeting for that. And again, the same process was put into place where you have you put in your application, had to follow certain guidelines, and then those were accepted. The ones that followed the guidelines were accepted to be put in part of the process. And then there were event days where they met, and the public were invited out to sit, and people could put up their stall and discuss. And again, there's a good collaboration. I was at the events, and there were not a large amount of participation, but the 2 issues kind of that arose from that is, one is that was across both rural and urban areas. So the projects that were based in urban areas had a high participatory value in that sense that they had a lot of people that were going to uptake their project, versus the smaller rural areas would maybe be a project of just the same quality, but they were in a village of 200 or 300 people that they didn't have the power of the vote. So effectively the participatory money went to the urban area. And whereas I think up in the Northeast, the NESCAN, what they've done is distributed. They've kind of realized that and put 1/3 into the urban area of Aberdeen, spread a third to the rural area of Aberdeenshire, and then a third to the urban area of Moray, or the rural area of Moray. So that's kind of that is maybe being addressed in that area, but be conscious of that, I think, is who is participants and how they can have a just. And again, going back to the council, the voting system was an online system. So again, that was not a just way to vote, because it left out a lot of people. So it was just an online system. So there are learning curves there, certainly.
Perfect, thank you, Gordy. That was a really good input. I'm going to pass to Yves now to see if he's got anything to comment on the voting, and then we'll come to Anna just after. You're on mute, Yves.
No, all right. I would like to continue the conversation on the competition versus collaboration, which will affect the way you vote. Now there is a greater attention by people like you, those working on PB, which is to have these workshops of co-construction, of co-building of projects. So when I look at, my budget cycles, from one city with another one, I had recently the topic when I was working with Lisbon and in Vienna, and usually you don't have enough time for the co-construction of projects. Mm. Many projects are similar and can be a way actually to get community to know each other. So you are generating social fabric through the formulation of projects. And you are usually, guys like us who are, engaged in PBs have a role to play. And I saw that, for instance, in Paris, they invited me and they had plenty of proposals. And one of the jobs of the whole municipality was to say, hey, these guys could work with this one, that could work with this one. At the end of the day, from the 39, 34 that we heard yesterday, you find yourself with much less projects, much more consolidating. It's a learning through, it can be on platform, but it works better when it's face-to-face. So you have one day with 6-7 tables where people who have been making ideas, projects, are listening and trying to elaborate better. So you really generate collaboration versus competition. You have less projects and people are happy with that usually. So that's quite important, but because it has an impact on the voting. Now, on the voting, I'm part actually of a few guys who are saying, like Montevideo or Lisbon that I was mentioning, that we think we should de-digitalize PBs. Keeping obviously the digital word, but we think that we need to make an effort to de-digitalize. And this word doesn't exist, but the concept could be taken up. And what I see, even I was mentioning Paris, is that you have mobile, the place where you vote is important. And I would like to tell a little bit on the new ways of in hybrid system, where you have usually a platform, of new ways for offline voting. You have, for instance, in Paris, bicycle, I mean, to show that it's no energy, or with voting boxes, transparent, that are moving from a market to a central, to a public space, and they go where people are. So it's not that people go to a specific place, but you go for having these votes. And that's quite interesting. What was, I mean, somehow a failure is that what Belo Horizonte wanted to do, to have these posting, these voting places in supermarkets or hypermarkets. So they gathered a huge amount of votes, but they were very, very significant, very little. People were not engaged, they were pressing buttons. But when you have the same exercise, for instance, on PB for schools now, there is something that the youngsters like a lot, which are all these tablets and iPad, etc. And so on a one day, you have all the school voting with the tablet, and instantaneously you have all your votes which appear. So it's a good use of digital technologies to see what is being done. And that's another side. What I hear very much upon is, if we are coherent with the social perspective of PB, is it's to have that located in social centers, in community development centers, which are the place to have that sort of vote. So the location is just as important as the process. That's my main conclusion or suggestion on that issue. And hybrid system, trying to digitalize in order to have the excluded voting. Migrants, people of other languages, people with less capacities, because at the point in time we worked a lot on people who couldn't see. And once they started to vote, they were seen as a part of the social groups. So the voting aspect was so crucial. You know, you have a special line for people who were not able to see, and they won projects. You know, so it's a way as well. The voting moment, that's a symbolic value in democracy. So that's something probably that would deserve a little bit more of reflection. I finalize with one comment, which I'm not surprised. I don't know enough what's happening in your country, but usually when there is little money, in order to avoid competition, there's a rule which are usually democratically voted. Again, let's go to Cuenca because I mentioned it. You know, with some criteria like vulnerability in front of flooding, etc., you get more points, which would lead you with more resources. You do not apply resources evenly. You have formula, and there are plenty of them. This is a whole word, where one parish, rural parishes, could have 100,000, and another one 500,000. So it's not small. And this, I think, is spatial justice at its best, and social justice at its best, with criteria on climate change, which are now plugged in. It's quite interesting, because you put your money where the needs are socially, spatially, climatically. So you're introducing a rule with number of inhabitants, jobs existing or not, and employment, level of services, where you are part of a policy which goes through climate, but which is spatially and socially just. And I see that you are a little bit evenly distributing resources, evenly. You know, you have not this sort of criteria-based method, which I think it's a regulatory role that I've seen working very well, and which is usually respected if it's elaborated with communities and people. And everybody is happy to have that. Yes, this is instrument to social and climate justice. But this would deserve a longer conversation, maybe.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. I think your reflections are very well received, Even. I think you make very valid points about how I suppose it goes back to that planning of that participation, and as much as we should always, in every exercise we do, look at how we engage people and maximise the participation where possible. PB is no different. So I suppose that alludes back to how do we plan stuff? How do we make sure most people can be involved? How are we implementing our national, the national standards for community engagement to make sure we're maximising and reducing inequalities as we go? So it's a very valid point, and you're right, it deserves probably a much longer conversation round about that. Just before I come to Jan, I'm going to come to you in a wee minute, and what I think I'm going to do is, because it's been a really good conversation and I didn't want to interrupt it, I think what I'll do is I'm going to go off-piste and I'm going to cancel the first workshop. We're still going to have a comfort break, in which during that comfort break, I'll post in a Jamboard link. So if anybody has any issues reaching the Jamboard, let us know. But in the 10 minutes when you're making tea and having a little cuppa, you can maybe pop some comments down on that, and that'll kind of keep us back in line, I think. So I'm going to come to you, Anne, and then after Anne, we'll go to a comfort break of 10 minutes. Anne.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the Climate Challenge Fund, which somebody mentioned, and we've had a number of projects that were funded by that. And our frustration was that you couldn't do a follow-on project that was similar. They wanted something new and shiny the next time, and my worry is that with all these projects, they're often short-term, and then you've got to sort of start thinking, of something new and exciting. And often it's the follow-on that saves the most carbon, because you haven't got to sort of set everything up again. You've got everything there. I mean, we're still using e-bikes that are 10 years old now, and we had 2 different project funding, but now we've just got a simple partnership with a couple of local businesses, and they hired bikes for us. So I mean, I think and also as time progressed with the Climate Challenge Fund, the application process got more and more complicated, and you didn't necessarily, what you were asked to produce in terms of proof didn't actually necessarily match what the real carbon savings. And now it's gone all together, which is frustrating, because for all those drawbacks, we did a huge amount of community engagement. And I think the amount of carbon we saved was pretty significant. Probably more than that same money spent on some government project, some government thing. I think the Highland Council did try and do a bit of participatory budgeting of their budget a couple of times, and you basically, this is our budget. What would you like what would you like to cut, basically, because there wasn't enough money. And the trouble is that the things that affect most people tend to be the most popular to spend money on. The things that only affect a few people aren't so popular. So you end up with this frustration in terms of additional needs budget. Well, that only affects a few people, so that didn't have as much priority as something else. And I don't know how you get around that in terms of green projects. If you realise that only a few people are, a small proportion of people are cycling at the moment, then they're mainly the people that are engaged in getting better facilities, whereas what you want is the majority of people to be cyclists. But how do you convince the people that are mainly motorists at the moment that really it's in their interest to spend money on cycling or active travel or whatever? Right, I think that's probably enough from me.
No, thank you very much. And it's actually quite timely you're talking about that, because after the break, I'm going to try and open a wee conversation round about funding, because it's something that's come up quite often in relation to participatory budgeting. We've had a few discussions within our team, our PB team round about it, and we'll maybe explore that in a wee bit more detail next. I mean, it's not going to be any great shakes or like any epiphanies, but it would be nice to start to open the conversation round about funding participatory budgeting.
So Francesca.
Oh, sorry, I never seen your hand.
No, sorry to interrupt. It's just super quick, because if we are going for the break in 1 minute and Eve is leaving in 1 minute and we don't have him for the next hour, can we give Eve this minute just to address before he goes that point made by Anne about you know, when there is an issue that is urgent and needs attention, but maybe it doesn't catch a crowd of people to support it. If you have anything to say on that, Eve, before you go.
One is, see, this is so crucial that in some places now, they are setting a minimum number for a project to be approved, a number of votes, in order not to delegitimize what is being done, saying sometimes it's 10, 20 people, it's not enough. So this mobilization by the people themselves of going for votes is an essential part. And what I've seen, which worked very interestingly, is when you have a 1 minute, it's called like pitches, you know, of 1 minute, where people are speaking and presenting their projects in order to capture votes and to inform. So on the local platform or local TV, you have all these projects which are being presented in order to reach your minimum standard of votes. So using media to be part of that effort. And going back to what I was saying, I was surprised in Stavropol, in the region, in Russia, in Caucasus, that they were so keen to have people presenting from community, that the physical voting was 2 votes, and if you are voting through the platform, you had only 1 vote. So it was a promotion to say, we need to be together. You need to pass, to discuss with others. And I was impressed because it worked. People were moving because they have more votes than somebody just sitting behind his computer or SMS and voting, you know. So there are different ways to gain votes, but it's about votes as well. You know, but I mean, it's so rich to listen to all of you that who am I, you know, to say, I think
thank you so much. It's been amazing. Sorry, Francesca, interrupted. I just thought Eve is leaving, and many colleagues here might not know, but Eve has been in the PB space for 30 years, and he was in Porto Alegre when it all started in '89 in Brazil. So that's why I wanted to get that perspective there. So thanks a lot, Eve.
All right, it was a pleasure. Meet you soon.
Perfect. Thank you, Eve. Sorry, I didn't realise you were leaving. Safe travels. Okay, folks, I'm just going to pop the Jamboard in, and then if we just go for a 10-minute comfort break. So if we just come back just after 12 minutes past. So go and grab another coffee, and we'll continue the conversation in 10 minutes. Okay, folks, just another minute, and then we'll maybe kick off some more conversations. Just having a look at the Jamboards just now. It's great that people are populating. Thank you so much. I'm maybe touching a couple of these just when we start. What I will say about the Jamboards is we'll send you a link to these as well in the follow-up email that will go out with a link to the evaluation, and they'll go open for a couple of days. So if you want to keep adding comments, we'll then look at them once they're probably Monday. So you'll have the weekends and to fill them out at your leisure. Sometimes it's a bit difficult when you're in the middle of a session to think about stuff, and there might be something that comes after that you want to ask, and then what we'll do is we'll try to respond to them as well. There's maybe just one point that I want to pick up from the Jamboard. Somebody put a really good comment in, or question round about getting teenagers politically and engaged in the political process. Sorry, I've lost you. Hold on. that's better. My technological skills aren't great. What I will say about there's lots of activity going on in schools around about participatory budgeting, and there's lots of activity obviously around about climate change in local schools with the kind of United, the sustainability goals for the United Nations and the learning for sustainability. So we are seeing lots of learning coming from schools around about climate knowledge for young people, and also coupling that with participatory budgeting, where they're actually getting to do their own processes, develop them, put their own ideas and vote. We're seeing this swing towards young people getting much more motivated in that kind of political area, and that's been seen right across the world. And some of the stuff that's coming out of America is quite groundbreaking in that their young people do go on to become much more involved in the political processes and much more inspired about getting involved in that and what they want to do. So there's some really good learning around about how this fosters that involvement in democracy, because it fundamentally it's setting that foundation for local democracy and young people getting involved in that. There's loads of links as well. At the end, I'll put a slide up that has links to PB Scotland, and you can go in there and look at all the youth activities ongoing, especially one really big thing this year is that South Lanarkshire Council have committed 5% of their PEF budgets to go out through participatory budget in all their schools that receive it, and I think something like £700,000 last year was disseminated in the schools through participatory budgeting. One of the schools were so successful that they are now allocating 20% of that budget for their young people, and that's in a secondary school as well, so it is teenagers. So really, really good work going on there, so just keep an eye on that. Hopefully, I think most of us will be back by now, and as always, we've had some drop-offs because people need to dip out, but that's quite good. So I think for the next section, we're going to talk about funding and also just a wee bit about where our programme is going in the next year. And then the plan was to put you into breakouts just to talk about what would help you in the future. But I think we can, it's quite a small enough group, so I think we can just do that on screen, if that's all right. I'm just going to pop up my slides again. See if I can do this. Nope. It's only a couple of slides, and it's just really so I remember what I want to chat about rather than I've got a mind like I said. Can you now see that? Yep. So just want to kick off a wee bit of a discussion around about the funding for PB. As I said a wee bit earlier, this is something we've been having kind of internal discussions at SCDC round about. It can be really difficult. It's quite a difficult landscape for PB funding and where to find out where to get that funding, where there's actual pots of money you can go for that funding. So I suppose it's just, this is a kind of starter for six to start that discussion round about funding PB. So what I want to talk today about probably just round about the traditional v innovation. So obviously the Climate Challenge Fund has come up. We know that there's big national funds there that people can submit bids for. Not many of them offer PB as a kind of set structure. There used to be the Community Choices funding, which was the big flagship Scottish Government funding. That's now been rolled into the Investing in Communities Fund. So as much as you can still apply for funding to run PB processes, it's involved in a bigger fund. As you will see, that fund also has climate change activity within it as well. So they've all kind of been brought under the one fund. So it is difficult to identify specific funds where you can go and apply for monies to run PB processes. There's not many big national funds at the minute disseminating funds through participatory budgeting. So really, I suppose this is about us starting to chat about how we can look at this a wee bit more out the box. So people like local funders. So with that, I'm talking mainly about public funders there, but there is funds locally and things like community planning partnerships, like health and social care partnerships, police, fire and rescue also have access to funding or certain pots of funding there. And it's about how do you potentially access the funds as well. Understandably, if you're going to run the PB process yourself, obviously it's a bigger thing, and maybe that's for bigger voluntary organisations to look at. but that's an avenue of funding. So sometimes I suppose what we were chatting about is, do we need to wait till these funds come out? Or is this now about us as communities saying, no, we want to run this PB process. Where can we find the funds? Who can we approach for this? So I suppose what I'm trying to discuss or start the discussion here is just to think about, do we always go to national funders? I came from a frontline community anchor organisation. We always went to big funders. We had some service level agreements with local partnerships where we accessed money to disseminate things like one of them was PB. But we, again, only knew about that because we were already involved in that field. So I suppose it's just pointing out there is local funders there. Your councils, your local public authorities will have monies, and it's about how do you access the right people just to start that conversation about, could this be done through PB? There's also additional funding opportunities. Local businesses, sometimes in certain areas, will give sponsorship for things. That's another possibility, that if we have the relationships with local businesses or coalition of businesses or small business gateways, there might be avenues there that if you know somebody, you can have that conversation. And I suppose it's pitching what their objectives are and what they would like to meet. And is it appropriate for a PB exercise? Would that help? Do you know? And also there's something about creating your own income. And there's a question around about, should we wait for big funding opportunities to come out, or should we look at how we can fund PB activity locally on our own merit? So say we had quite a strong, for example, regional network of hubs. Is there something we can do around about community lotteries? Because I mean, that's a popular thing that's done in certain areas. And then what happens with the funds is people get money, like one winner gets money every month, but then the rest of the money is put out in a kind of community grants-based model. Is there space there to look at that as a PB model? Could it be that we do community lotteries or crowdsourcing with the aim of, if you're donating money, this is what it is going to do? So there's something to be said around about that. And also significantly for the climate change area and field, wind farm monies. I mean, there is huge amounts of monies come in sometimes to community councils from wind farms. Is that a conversation we could be having with community councils to say, how are you disseminating this money? A lot of the times it's disseminated very well through, again, community grants-based models. But is this something we could look at using a proportion of that in our kind of participatory budgeting process? So that, and I'll stop sharing at this moment. So that's our thinking round about it. And I'm wondering if MD wants to chip in any comments or anything round about what I've just said. Because as I say, we're very, very early and we're trying to just start to navigate this. Pat, you've got your hand up. Hello.
Sorry, I'm just unmuting.
Yep.
Yeah, a number of things about funding. I love the idea of perhaps having some kind of list of possible ways of getting funding, which aren't the obvious ones. So I love that. About funders, I have two issues with funders, and I think there's a huge issue about educating funders. One is this whole question, somebody's already raised it, of you have a wonderful program, it's very successful, it's having a major outcome, and they won't refund it, and you have to rethink it and come up with something new and innovative. And I think that is just, to me, it's crazy, it doesn't make sense. And the other thing funders are not good at is giving you time. So if you're serious about doing this in a way that you are going to engage with your local community, you need time for that. That's not instant. And funders tend to have very tight time frames. The third thing was the point about needing a bank account. And I think there's something about, certainly it's something, one of my hats is I'm on the board of Outside the Box. We're a community development support organisation. And one of the things we've looked at in the past is, would there be a way of setting up some kind of thing, whatever it might look like, which would actually provide that shelter, if you like, for small community groups so that they wouldn't necessarily need their own bank account. So that's just an idea.
No, I think you make really valid points, Pat, there. Thank you very much for them. The list of funders is a really interesting point you make, because I'm going to go on to speak in a couple of minutes about our plans for the future, and that is something that from Green PB Scotland we can have a look at, and PB Scotland in general, about muting these ideas. So this is very much a muting of the ideas. This is the first time we've kind of spoke about it with people to get their I suppose their comments and their opinions. So that's a really good pointer for us to maybe have a think about resources that we could be producing at a later date round about what and where to find PB funding. And I think the biggest thing that you said there for me is the time. When it comes to funders' time, we have in my personal PB experience and PB experience from others, time is always a factor when it comes to the process of PB, and quite often the timescales are really restrictive in how much deliberation you can get through with communities. And I think hugely valid point round about if there's a big funder coming in, and also that edges me towards this. If we were able to access different funding, could we then elongate the length needed for that? So therefore, if we were going for these pots, could we be putting that in as a stipulation? So thank you very much for that. Jordi, you've got your hand up, or Gordy, you've got your hand up, sorry.
Yeah, just wanted a couple of things, just to add in my experience around PB and microfunding around development trust, and like it said earlier about the event that we distribute the microfunding. And that's part of what, as we build capacity, certainly in small community groups around climate action, there is a microfunding and a PB element that could be very successful there. But what we had done is allowed the development trust to be the banker. So we just had cash in a safe, and if that particular organization had a limit of £500 to spend, then they just came in and said, well, I want to go buy some shovels, here's £50, come back with the receipt, and that kind of eliminates the microfunding aspect with that. But that again is geographically specific into a small area, an estate or something. Whereas, well, you know, a lot of this work is going to be very valued in when a just transition as we build in supporting areas of deep deprivation. So that's kind of some of the PB stuff that's been done already, at least in Scotland anyway. So I'll leave that there.
Thank you very much, Gordy. We've seen a lot of, in fact, the fund that's opened in Just Transition in the Northeast at the minute is doing a similar thing, in that unconstituted groups can apply for money if they have a group that will basically be their umbrella. So a bit like what you were talking about in the borders. So that's where maybe a community anchor organisation will come in, or a bigger volunteer group, even a community council, and say that they'll hold the funds for them. So that is being seen. But as you say, it can be really sketchy depending on what organisations are available in areas. So it might be having that discussion, Pat, as you were saying, with out of the box about, is there some national org that would have a look at that? I doubt it, but I mean, blue sky thinking, right? I mean, you don't ask, you don't get. Is there anything? Yeah. Oh, sorry, Pat.
Sorry, just to respond to that, I think the idea of local development trust holding funding is a really good idea.
Mm-hmm. I'm just writing that down, Pat. Any other, Oliver?
Yeah, just following on that, and well, and also just also echoing what Pat was saying about, well, both the short-term funding for long-term issues, which is absolutely appalling. And we are, I mean, we have a national strategic group on PB with all kinds of public bodies and civil society organizations. And this is one of the issues that we are looking at. We have a subgroup on culture shift and changing that culture, but that's going to take time. But the other thing as well is that we did a European project, which included the UK, Denmark, in the UK, both England and Scotland, and then also Netherlands. And one of the conclusions and one of the contrasts with mainland Europe was this obsession about this bias towards innovation. Instead of sustaining good practices that are already in place, here there is by default a bias towards innovation. So people are having to do acrobatics to kind of redress things that are working well as if they were new. And it's such a total waste of time. And it's also about philosophy. I mean, innovation is fine, but it shouldn't be the primary. So we are having those conversations with funders as well. And there are funders who get it, like Coda Foundation, the Robertson Trust. So I think there are some inroads, but it's early days. Just for info, and I'll post a link in the chat. There is an initiative in Edinburgh led by Leah Black from Wester Hales from Wales, and she's seconded at EVOC, the Edinburgh Voluntary Organizations Council, and they are looking at something they are calling the Regenerative Challenge Fund, which is looking at a 10-year framework for funding based on trust rather than the other. So I'll post a link to that, and I hope they are successful because they could show the way on this. And then the other final point I'll make is building on Gordy's point about development trusts. I mean, you know, for the Northeast pilot, which it is $1 million, but it really is nothing, to be honest, because across the three, I don't want to say it's nothing, it's important. And by the way, it is the largest part of PB in Scotland so far. So that is all true. But in the scale of the challenge we're facing, obviously that needs to be scaled up manifold. And for that to happen, one of the good things about it, though, is that a big chunk of it, the majority of it, goes to capital expenditure, which to me is an opportunity to connect with the development trusts movement to invest in assets that may generate revenue and to create independent sources of funding, so we're not always dependent on the state. And I think that has to be a core part of this movement, the connection to the development trusts movement. So we're not always just chasing external funds. But I know it's not easy, but many are trying, and some development trusts are doing really well.
Perfect, thanks, Oliver. Okay, anything else around funding at the minute? Perfect. So probably just, we're almost at the end, folks, and just wanted to maybe go over a couple of the things looking to the future. Obviously, I've just muted the idea that we're looking at funding. So just to explain a little bit about where we go from here. So at SCDC, we will continue to look at Green PB into the future, as well as holding all the other stuff that we already do with participatory budgeting. This pilot project for Green PB comes to an end in March officially, but based on what we're learning, it probably will be rolled in some capacity to our overall bigger PB programme. So this year we were tasked in a very exploratory phase of looking at where Green PB is happening, where it can be encouraged, what can we do in the future to make it happen a wee bit more. And this is why we've been having discussions with the likes of SCAN, community climate pathway hubs already set up in the Northeast and NESCAN as well. The Highlands and Islands in NESCAN. We've had contact with Climate Action Hub towns and climate action plans. So we're trying to go through to see where there is actually inroads for green participatory budgeting. On top of that, we also have a Green PB action group, which is made up of a range of stakeholders, from people involved in climate change to young youth advocates like Youthline Scotland and big nationals like Greenspace, but also smaller organisations like Dartwood Crew, who are actually at the forefront of developing some of their frontline community responses to climate change and environment through PB, and Green Health Network. So it's a kind of collaborative group to have an idea of how to go forward and what resources we need to encourage Green PB and linking PB very much into climate change. We've been in contact with schools as well, and there's a whole suite of resources started to be developed on Green PB Scotland website, including what is Green PB, green and fact sheets about how to make your operations a wee bit more greener. We've also learned as we go through this process, interestingly, about the importance of not siloing green to Green PB. It needs to come right across our operations. So as a company, we're also looking at how we can bring in that environmental aspect to everything that we do, and how we, like, for example, how we green everything that we're doing. We're trying to develop things like badges and seals so that people understand what a dedicated process would look like for green participatory budgeting, but also where green climate change actions might factor into normal PB processes as well, and that's perfectly acceptable. That's what we want. So we're looking at a way to be able to identify them across Scotland as well. So really just learning about what this means and how we can encourage that in the future. And I suppose just for the last couple of minutes or last 10 minutes or so, we do have a few questions to ask just round about what future do you see from Green PB? Do you see a future, basically, and what would support that climate action? Another question round about what further support could be explored. What would help you as practitioners not in that field emerge into that field, if you like, and what would be useful? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to invite questions and comments, but I'm also going to pop into the chat another Jamboard. Again, no necessity for you to fill that out as we speak. It will be open for a couple of days, but just really start conversations round about what would you really need to be able to further your Green PB journey, or look at that and what would be useful for you. Okay, that's a Jamboard in there. There's actually 3 sheets in that, so you can click through at the beginning as well. So there's 3 questions there. Does anybody have any comments or anything that they want to say around about that at the minute? I've stunned you into silence. It's past that 1.5 hour mark that I don't like to go past in an online session, because it is a long session. Gordy, you've saved me.
I don't know if I saved you or not. You haven't heard what I want to say yet.
No, yeah. Listen, we do want to hear what you've got to say.
No, I think just around funding and my experience delivering projects across a number of climate challenge funded, but RCGF funding, large various pots of money. But I think it's about a pathway, and I think the PB is a pathway for a lot of these organizations as we work through climate action and building capacity and collaboration. I think it's a pathway to I use the word sustainable, but effectively organizations that can fund themselves down the road, or at least become partially funded, whether it's a development trust building leisure assets that are carbon neutral, which is I've just been involved with, that they now have a business plan that's sustainable, that they can deliver climate action in their community, but they have they're doing it with a social enterprise model that effectively they'll be self-sufficient in what they do. And I think that's important, that we can't, the Climate Challenge Fund was great, but it was effectively an act of fireworks. It was just, we had lovely blooms everywhere, but when the fireworks was done, it all just faded away and we all had to go home again. And I think that versus now, where I think we're looking at, to use that same scenario, as maybe we're more looking at a drone event, that we have a bunch of lit drones that'll make a beautiful event, but we can just bring them down again and put them back up again whenever we want or need. And that's kind of a scenario around that I've just kind of played over my head. But I think it's about a pathway, and I think how this participatory budget is key in building collaboration with groups in areas or across themes, whether it's geographical areas, whether themes around climate actions, whether those other themes around that, youth work being one of them. I think it's a pathway to that, and that's just about what I'd like to say. PB, the pathway.
You're coining a new phrase, Gordy. I like it. Brian, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I'm very new to this. This has just come across this topic, and I think it is something that should be going forward with. One of the aspects of being a volunteer is that you start off a project, you get a bit of funding, and then you're so busy with the project itself, it's difficult to get into funding mode again. Yeah. You need to change your brain set, if you like, to go into funding. And I find that very, very difficult. And it is a very competitive space as well. So if you don't have the right collection of words, it can be difficult. Mm-hmm. And in terms of making presentations, some of us are just not used to that. Even speaking to a forum like this is new for me. So, getting up and making a presentation and competing with others just doesn't float my boat. So there might be other ways you have to perceive as well to catch these people that are put off by that. Mm-hmm. But thank you very much. It's been very, very informative.
Perfect. And thank you so much for your input, Brian. And I think you actually raise a very good point about the presentation, because there is people that's not comfortable with it. And we've seen that in kind of PB activity across the country, and where that's happened, there's been various, I'm not going to say PB is perfect, it's never perfect. And there's been various scenarios where some people haven't went forward because it had to be a frontline presentation, but then there's been other really good examples of where the people that were running the PB process had thought about that and had these conversations, and therefore where people were not comfortable speaking in front of people who are doing a marketplace, they were able to film maybe videos or present stuff online that was accessible, so that took that fear out of it from them and reduced that barrier, because at the end of the day, that's a barrier. If people don't feel comfortable in the process, then it becomes a barrier. But it's a really valid point. And I'm really glad that you're new to the arena though, and you're quite excited about the prospect of PB. That makes me happy. And I still don't know how to do presentations, and I've been in this game a long time. Oliver.
Yeah, I'm conscious that I've been speaking too much, so apologies for that. This is the final thing I'm going to say, but the thing is, you know, since 2010, we've had 400 PB processes in Scotland. So there is a wealth of experience, and chances are that somewhere near you, there will have been some experience. But it's only now, I think, that there is enough of a critical mass and investment that is going to take off properly. And it hasn't entered the main public imagination yet. You don't see it in the media. So there's a lot of work to be done on that. And the National PB Group is trying to work towards that. But in terms of practical steps, because many of us have for a long time, including Philip here and many others, have seen the connection between PB and climate action, because climate action is the what, and PB can be part of the how, if we're serious about community-led regeneration, community-led climate action. You know, so in terms of keeping connected to this space, I posted there the link to PB Scotland, which is our national network, and the Green PB group that has emerged within that, which Francesca leads. And I think that that's a good way of keeping in touch, just signing up for the newsletter and then seeing the connections. And the final one, and this is also a practical step for which might or might not be relevant to some of you, you know, the best chance we have of making Green PB a really, really big thing in Scotland and really shift you know, the dial on this and make it a real instrument for climate action is to make the Northeast pilot as a complete success. And NESCAM is involved in that. So, you know, any support that can be lent to NESCAM, anything that can be done to, you know, or if you're intrigued and you want to see how it works, if there are opportunities to go and shadow some of the people involved, chipping and some of the things they're going to be doing over the next few months, or just get in touch so that they can keep you posted. I think, you know, the best way to learn about these things is to see them work in practice. And we have the best possible scenario, which is this 1 million across the Northeast over the next few months. All needs to be done and dusted by March or April, I think. So, you know, if that one succeeds, then it could multiply, and that's when there will be many more opportunities. And I think that's our best bet in terms of increasing the funding and then making this a real critical mass of processes across the country.
Perfect. I think you're absolutely right, Oliver. And I think that's the other thing, just to highlight that when Pat was talking earlier on about how it's always a quick turnaround with funding, that these guys in the Northeast have had, like, I think in total will have had 8 months to do this for the beginning at the end. So they had a presentation yesterday, and it was a great presentation, and they were very clear about this isn't going to be perfect, but it'll be the best it can be, because they want this in the future, and if they can demonstrate that it works, then why not? It's a big platform, so they have constraints and they're doing wonderfully well. Does anybody have any other questions, comments, or queries that they would like to add? Gillian.
Hello, Francesca. Hello. So yeah, so I'm new to all this as well, but I just want to pick up on the point that you were saying about you know, it doesn't always have to sit separately, because that's what I'm finding. I'm new in my role, and I'm finding that, you know, just try to get anything to do with even mentioning the word climate sometimes, and can be a wee bit of a barrier. So trying to push this sort of green agenda and PB. I'm wondering how that's actually going to look, because I'm struggling just to get into communities. I feel sometimes there's no, it's not even gatekeepers, it's just that people have got their own agendas, and trying to get in there and talk about what we need to talk about, never mind bringing green PB in. So I'll be really interested to follow this journey and see, you know, how other people are progressing that, to see how that we can replicate that. But yeah, I know who to shout on to help me, so I'll be fine.
Absolutely, anytime, Gillian. But it's actually a really valid point, and I think it goes back to a point that was made very early in the presentation that I probably didn't make as explicit, and it's this importance that what we've been seeing in the learning of this project and this kind of green PB program is there is lots of brilliant examples of where climate action is actually happening as a result of PB activity, but it's never been highlighted as green PB activity. So when we can go back and look at the impact of that and have the conversation with the people that have actually been involved in it, then they start to realise where their climate contribution is. I mean, best will in the world, and a lot, especially in deprived communities, what we see is that we, Maggie and Thomas who down the road, don't really care about how much of a carbon footprint they have, as long as they're mainly interested in how they are going to pay their bills by the end of the week, feed their family and heat their house. Whereas if they're involved in a local project where they're going to get like free community cafe or free community hubs, or how, I don't know, all these kind of localized projects, when you have them in and they see a benefit to themselves and they see how that actually can improve their quality of life, is when they're ready for that conversation around about climate change. So a lot of the stuff we've been talking about is where do you meet communities at that point where they're ready to speak about climate change? When do they feel comfortable? And a lot of the times it's when they see the benefits for themselves. Yeah. So it's not just you that's seeing this, and I think a good contact would be probably Dartwood crew, who are just, they're in the middle of that at the minute, where they've got projects running as a result of PB. People are starting to see the differences that they're making and understand how they're contributing to net zero. And another major point about that to bear in mind is that often these communities in the most deprived areas have the lowest carbon footprint anyway. So it means that they don't really know what they can do to help. So anyway, I'm ranting. Yeah. Can you have your hand up?
Sorry, can I come in?
Yes.
Yep. Well, I'm part of a project that's looking beyond the climate change itself, because what we believe is that it's democracy that's the issue, or lack of it. And we are trying to get the community councils to do people's assemblies. But we are struggling to get funding for that as well, because we need some background funding. And I'm not sure if the participatory budgeting will be inclusive of that idea, or to try and sell it as a consequence of saving carbon footprint in the end. Once people get together in people's assemblies, they'll discuss these issues and come to a rational conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Well, for that one, I seen Oliver getting really excited when the word democracy was used, so I'm going to come straight to Oliver for a response to that.
But I really don't want to talk much, and I want to hear Philip, but I'll say, Brian, I'm going to post a link to the work that we did with SCDC, where Francesca is based, on the reform of community councils that we've been proposing, which was done with community councillors across the country, and that might help. I couldn't agree more. You know, if we sort out democracy, it will be so much easier to then tackle the climate emergency. Because we don't have the luxury of time, we're going to have to do both at the same time, which is a big challenge, but there's a lot of people working towards that.
So my final comment would be is, in the information that you put out after this, will there be links to people to talk to about the different projects I'm involved in and see how they would fit in overall? And then it might be worth putting in the effort to pursue that for funding.
We can do it. Yeah, I'll definitely. So that's for community councils and yes.
Yeah, and tree planting.
Tree planting.
Well, apple trees in particular.
That might be a struggle, but I'll maybe ask Philip about that.
Well, the apple tree project is about communities being able to take the fruit and make juices from it. Then they can do what they want. They can raise funds for themselves to do their own projects. That's the idea. So we're trying to do that across Aberdeen and Shire.
Okay. Philip?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the back of Brian's comment there, and Oliver's input as well about local democracy, because somebody on the Jamboard was asking about the level of interest in PB across SCAN, and the answer to that is that I don't actually know how many members of SCAN are even aware of PB. But in terms of SCAN's interest, we see this very much of a piece with our interest in reimagining local democracy and really just communities just taking that into their own hands and starting to organise local deliberative processes which they can then really use to engage local people and people's knowledge and collective intelligence to come up with local solutions. So we very much see PB as all part of that agenda around reimagining local democracy.
Thanks, Philip. Very much agree with you there. Okay, folks. So is there any other questions? Nope.
No, I need to get back to my granddaughter now. Thank you.
Well done, you've lasted well. I mean, I'm impressed that we've still got as many people in the room after nearly a 2-hour session. But with all seriousness, thank you so much. I think the discussions have been really, really useful. As I say, fill out the Jamboards over the weekend if you want. There'll be links going out and everything that will capture everything. And yeah, just thank you so much. There's so many things going around in my head of the stuff that was brought up. It's been really, really good. And we'll get some kind of post-event report round as soon as we can. And anything that you're feeding back, I'll feed back into recommendations to go to our European partners as well. So let's have confidence in the fact that we'll do that as well. Philip, you've still got your hand up. You want to come in again?
Yes, before we close, I just wanted to come in briefly, Francesca, just give a vote of thanks really to you in particular, Francesca, for pulling this session together and all your input, but also to Oliver, obviously, as well, for his contributions, which is much valued, and Joanna and the background as well has done a lot to bring the session together as well, and everybody else at SCAN, and all you for your participation in what I think has been a really interesting discussion. So yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Well, without further ado, folks, you're free to leave. Go and get your tea.